Okay, good afternoon. My name is Beheshte Abdi, and I'm an instructional designer at University Online Education Services at Rutgers University. On behalf of the 2025 Rutgers University Online Learning Conference, I welcome Dr. Craig Levans, coordinator of instructional design and technology at Rutgers Art Online. We are pleased to have them share their thoughts on enhancing user experience and interface design in Canvas presentation. During this presentation, please engage using the live chat session. You may pose any question you have during and after the presentation, and the presenter will answer as we go along and also at the end of the presentation. Go ahead, please. Right.
Great. Well, thank you guys all for coming. So we are going to be talking about some basic elements of user experience design. Best practices, looking at some examples in Canvas and some applications. So by necessity, given the time we have, this is going to be a surface look, and we're going to focus on just a few concepts, best practices, and their applications. The two acronyms you often hear in this space are UX and UI. UI being user interface and UX being user experience. The user interface is any part of the technology that the person touches or interacts with, screens, buttons, navigation, sorry, and any kind of visual elements. While user experience deals with the overall interaction with the product, including how a person feels about that interaction. So we are going to talk about both, but just to keep from getting too complex, everything I refer to, I'm just going to say UX rather than try to specify what is UX and what is UI. So before we begin, a quote. This has been said many times by many different people. This particular iteration is by a designer named Jared Spool. And he says, good design, when it's done well, becomes invisible. It's only when it's done poorly that we notice it. So my goal in all the courses that I work on is to make the learning as seamless and fluid as possible so the canvas and the interactions that I design blend into the background. We want to leave as much mental energy for the students for their actual task, which is learning, and reduce any mental energy they have to spend on the interface or working to figure out where they should be going or what they should be doing next. So, what's the point? Canvas is already good enough, right? Well, for the most part, it is. What we're going to focus on is reducing two things, friction and interaction cost. So, friction is anything that slows down or prevents users from taking a desired action, while interaction cost is the total amount of things that the user must do to accomplish their goal. Now, friction isn't always bad. There are some kinds of desired friction. So, for example, in Canvas, putting the next button on the bottom of the page slows down your progression, but it forces you to view the whole page before moving on. The same thing would be like with a quick check where you have to answer a question before moving on. That's good friction. That prevents you from moving on too quickly. Bad friction is frustrating and something that gets in the way. There is almost no positive to a high interaction cost, unlike friction. So there are three kinds of friction: emotional, cognitive, and interaction. Emotional friction is the hardest to get your head around because it is not universal, and it's very hard to identify and even harder to fix. A classic example of emotional friction is somebody, for instance, coming across something that doesn't work well and rage quitting a website. There's a great anecdote that I read while preparing for this about how a certain e-commerce site had placed a credit card button near the checkout. And the point of that button was just to say that they did in fact take credit cards. But people saw that, thought it was a button to pay with a credit card, and would click it repeatedly, angrily, as if more clicks would turn it into a button, until they just quit. Now, that's actually both cognitive friction and emotional friction. We'll get to that in a second. This particular e-commerce site changed the location of that button and increased their conversions significantly. But emotional friction is anything that gets you upset or conflicted about accomplishing a goal. Cognitive friction is when something doesn't work the way it looks like it's supposed to. To reduce cognitive friction, we want to make a website act like it does or act like real life. That's why when you go shopping, you put your digital items in a cart or in a bag even though there is no cart or bag to be found. We want these experiences to be like real life. So cognitive friction occurs when we see something, but it doesn't work the way we expect it to. Interaction friction is when stuff really just doesn't work. It's the easiest one to identify because it's going to affect most of the users regardless of expectation, while both cognitive friction and emotional friction require the user, the person experiencing the friction, to bring something to the table, to have expectations. Now, a designer by the name of Sachin Rekhi organized these into a pyramid, with interaction friction at the bottom, cognitive friction in the middle, and emotional friction at the top. The idea is that interaction friction causes cognitive friction. Cognitive friction can then cause emotional friction. But generally speaking, it doesn't work the other way. Emotional friction doesn't cause cognitive friction, it arises from it. So we're going to spend almost all of our time talking about interaction friction because that is the root of many of the evils that we see in this particular field, with cognitive friction being a close second. Now, interaction costs are a little bit different because there are very few positives about interaction cost. You may have heard, if you're a web designer, about the 3-click rule. So there was this old rule that said you need to get to anything on your website within 3 clicks. So this has been disproven. That 3-click rule is not actually a thing, but the spirit of it remains true. And the spirit is that the more clicks you have to do, the more things you have to do, the less likely you are to keep engagement. So as designers, we're always looking for a way to minimize the amount of time that people are clicking, scrolling, looking for particular items on a screen. All of those things add up and become interaction cost. Okay, so friction and interaction costs are what we want to eliminate. And to put it very simply, we want things to work well. We want them to work the way they expect, and we want them to work quickly without having a lot of interactions. So we need some tools to help us get there. There is a body of knowledge that helps us navigate these problems. I do have a couple caveats though. The first is that most of the data we discuss is actually related to advertising or customer retention and engagement, not education. That said, it's relevant to what we do in that we've been trained to view online content a certain way, and that carries over into our educational experience. But the data that we have is geared specifically towards figuring out how to sell you more things. And then the second, good UX design is a moving target. So expectations and functionality change. How we use the web changes. So for example, a little bit later, I'm going to talk about the page fold, but how we are being trained to use the web is changing in that we are scrolling down so much more than we used to, thanks to things like Reddit or Facebook. So how we view the web and the things we do will change, and it is a moving target. To start with best practices, there's 2 things I want to point out. The first is the laws of UX. Now, these change in number depending on who you ask and when you're looking, but my favorite group is curated by a designer by the name of John Yablonsky. There you go, it's a mouthful. And he has a great website called The Laws of UX, where he goes into 30 laws that some are not relevant to us, some are, with great examples. We're going to look at 3. And second is Jakob Nielsen's 10 heuristics of UX design. Now, Jakob Nielsen is kind of a pivotal character in our story today. He is one of the founders of the Nielsen and Norman Group, or is it the Nielsen and Norman Group, the NNN Group, which is a consulting firm specializing in universal experience or user experience design. So he is somebody who, from the beginning, has thought deeply about how these experiences are, and has had a pretty big impact on the field. And we are going to be looking at some data from the NNN Group as we get into web viewing patterns. So a few relevant examples of the laws of UX. The most important is Jacob's Law. And this is Jakob Nielsen of the Nielsen and Norman Group. So he is doing double duty today, both as the author of the heuristics and as the author of Jacob's Law. Users spend most of their time on other sites. That means the users prefer your site to work the way those others do, which is to say, we cannot expect people to come into Canvas, into our educational sites, and view this in a way that is not comparable to the way they view YouTube, Facebook, Reddit, or any of the other sites they're spending time on. Tesler's law states that we have to manage complexity. If we try to eliminate complexity completely, we will, of course, fail. So our designs have to look at those things that are most complex and figure out how to manage them with the understanding that we cannot eliminate entirely. So Canvas does a pretty good job of this already. If you've been teaching for a long time, you'll know that the Canvas student gradebook has been a problem for years. And many of us have probably had students who have failed a course because they misread the gradebook, at least the way it was organized before. So in terms of managing complexity, that's an example of Canvas over multiple iterations trying to change the way that gradebook works. And it is generally getting better, but it is still a fairly complex thing where sometimes the grades count if they're put in and sometimes they're not. And then finally, the aesthetic usability effect. If it looks better, people will think it works better. And unfortunately, this applies to just about every field. Things that look better in general are decided or thought to work better and be more functional. Of the heuristics, I pulled out 4 that are kind of interesting and useful to us. The first is consistency and standards. This basically says we need internal consistency with our website, with our design, with our course, and that this course should be consistent with other courses, other websites out there in the world. And if you're seeing a lot of overlap with Jacob's Law, you're absolutely right, because what we're doing is we're making sure that users do not have to wonder what a particular thing does or operates as, because they are remembering it from their lived experience on other sites. Recognition rather than recall. We want to minimize the working load of the student by making sure that everything they need is easily obtainable. You don't have to remember something. We can show it to you again. This gets tricky because recognition can sometimes, rather than recall, heuristic 6 can sometimes lead to an increase in interaction costs. We'll see a little bit of that later in our examples. And then finally, aesthetic and minimalist design. Interfaces should not contain information that is irrelevant or rarely needed. So when you're designing an interface, if you think that there may be 1 or 2 students who might want that link, for instance, a rubrics link, but it turns out that you really don't think any more than a few each semester will look for it, then in general, that's something that we are going to get rid of. One thing I want to show here, and this is going to be very, very familiar to some of us older folks. This last point, aesthetic and minimalist design. To show you what a moving target UX design is, I'm going to show you very quickly what the first Google search interface looked like 20 years ago. Remember this one? So that is what Google looked like in its initial iteration. There's so much junk on that page that we never really need to see, versus the modern Google iteration, the modern UI, which is this clean, modern, very clear aesthetic. 20 years ago, people loved that Google design. Now that would never make it out of a beta stage. Now we're going to look at some page viewing patterns. And we have to talk about the page fold. So of all the viewing patterns that we're going to look at, the page fold is the one that actually has the most relevance to us. What this says is that things within the first 2 screens get about 84% of our attention. Or put it another way, people spend 84% of their time on those top 2 screens. What you're seeing on the right here is a heat map that was generated by the NNN group using eye tracking software as people read non-search engine pages. So what this is saying is that in the red, that's where a majority of people spent a majority of time looking, and then the yellow to the gray to the white is in order decreasing page views. So this is still true of mobile and of other screen sizes, but the prevalence of mobile devices and apps has made judging where the page fold is incredibly difficult. So when we talk about the page fold, I'm talking about the average size computer or laptop monitor. I'm not brave enough to tackle what the page fold issue is like on mobile quite yet. Give me a couple more years and I'll maybe try to tackle that. In any case, the page fold is still a thing. And the page fold gives us a bit of a problem in that we need a certain amount of information up top, and then we need to convince viewers, we need to convince readers that it is worth their time to scroll down. And so part of what we do as designers is we try and make sure that the below the fold items are attractive enough, are laid out properly enough so that people will continue to scroll. A bit of warning about these numbers. You're going to see a lot of numbers online about the page fold from Google. Google gets their numbers in a different way. So the way Google gets their numbers is by looking at pixels that are viewable on the screen. So basically, Google says an ad has been seen if 50% of the pixels are on screen for 1 second. And by their numbers, advertisements above the fold get 73% viewability, and below the fold, I think it was, I can't remember the number, but they average it out to 66%, a 66% drop off below the fold. Those numbers aren't numbers I like to use because they're specifically geared towards advertising. And I think those can really muddy the waters if you're online looking for, items or information about how to view things or how to track things. Web reading patterns is one of the hardest things to get your head around, I find, when you're designing an actual course. So web tracking or eye tracking software shows that people tend to scan non-search web pages in a few patterns, the F shape being the most common. The F shape is absolutely everywhere in web design. It is where you have a row on the left, usually a menu row, and then something across the top, and then various lines of text or items going down in the middle. So if you look at this image on the right, that's the one where you can kind of see it the clearest, where you have the left-hand column and across the top going down. There are guides online you can find on how to write to defeat the F-shaped pattern, how to write to defeat the other kinds of patterns. And this is something that is a little bit beyond the scope when I'm trying to look at today, but I did want to mention it and bring it up because it does apply to most educators and most course designers as you're looking at how a particular teacher may be organizing their written lectures. So the other patterns, we have the layer cake pattern. We scan the first things of paragraphs, spotter, skipping around. The marking pattern is what we do on mobile, where you keep your eyes in one spot and then you scroll the screen. Bypassing, and then the holy grail, the commitment pattern, where somebody just reads everything. That's what we're going for, of course, as educators, is the commitment pattern. But, we have to work to get it. So I'm going to pause for a moment here. As you read this, if the data is to be believed, most of you actually basically read this. And this was that previous page with the F-shaped pattern. You read the first thing, and then you skip down, you said, oh, spotted pattern, big chunks, marking pattern, and you went down before deciding whether or not you needed to read the whole thing. Research also says that a number of us would have read in the layer cake pattern, which means that a bunch of you probably just read the first line before skipping the rest of the paragraph. Now, this isn't, a value judgment. The way I look at this, and the way that the NNG group phrases it, is that people are trying to be efficient with their time, and they've adopted these patterns because they're trying to see if it is worth their time to continue reading particular elements. And then designers will actually design and format to match those patterns, thereby reinforcing the patterns that they've learned. So it's kind of a self-reinforcing cycle. If you want to take advantage of the layer cake pattern, for example, you need very interesting, punchy first sentences of paragraphs. If you want to take advantage of, or if you want to counteract the layer cake, which we'll see in a moment or two, you need to put something at the beginning and at the end of a paragraph that bookends it so that people's attention carries all the way through. Okay, so here's what we know so far. We know our goal is to reduce friction. We know there's a few kinds of friction, like interaction friction and cognitive friction. We know we want to introduce interaction cost. And we also know that there are certain web scanning patterns that if we go against could cause additional friction, but if we go with could cause actual, missing of data or missing of important things. So our goal as designers is to find the friction. So Jacob's law is first. And by following Jacob's law, we reduce cognitive and interactive friction, meaning that if our websites and our courses look the way everybody else's looks, then in general, people will be able to use them better and will notice the interface less. We have Tesla's law, which says, okay, I can't make this completely seamless. So let me find the friction and let me manage it. Let me create content. Let me create menus or links that help smooth over the rough patches that cannot be eliminated. And then aesthetic usability effect. Does it look clean, clear? Are there unnecessary elements? Because the better it looks, the less emotional friction you'll find. And as an added bonus on this page, I did a very, very clumsy attempt to get rid of your pancake layer reading. And the whole point of this is by having the red text in the front mixed with the red text in back, that more of you would have read the whole sentence in between rather than just read the beginning and skip to the end. Whenever I reference things like that, there is actual studies and data to back up that this works. To some extent, it's fuzzy though, as is many things in this field. With the heuristics, the first one does go hand in hand with Jacob's law. Your design should mimic current industry standards. Don't assume a popular website is a good design. There are a couple of really atrocious design examples out there right now. The Facebook web app, web design is terrible. If you've been on eBay recently, eBay is just a nightmare. So look for good design, which is kind of an oxymoron because by very definition, good design you shouldn't notice. But when you see bad design, you will. And then look at those and understand at least what not to do. Recognition rather than recall. So if you establish a consistent page design and layout, then you're going to help users recall or recognize those elements and then come back to them to think about them. When you make a change, it should be meaningful, right? So changes should signify something. And then aesthetic and minimalist design. Get rid of the redundant links, things that don't matter as much, and reduce the clutter to take advantage of the white space in defining elements. A few tips before we go into the examples. UX design is an iterative process. You are going to make multiple versions of everything. So for the instructional designers out there who know or others who know the lingo, my approach to all of this is very much in the Sam camp rather than Addy, where I'm constantly making iterative versions of things, right? UX design really depends on iteration to find that right combination of elements. That said, everything is going to be a compromise. Number two, it's much easier to take elements out than to put it in. So in general, start with more than you think you might need, but then as it is easier to come back and take things out. And then finally, remember one of the axioms of UX design, which is that you are not the user. So you need to look at things and ask questions from the student's point of view. If you're designing for yourself, you're making a very big assumption. You're assuming that the person that you're teaching is like you. Since you have risen in the ranks to become an educator or a designer, most likely only 5 or 10% of the students that you come across are going to be as academically dedicated as you are. And so a lot of teachers will end up designing a course that they would like to see and that they would like to have, but it ends up being something that misses the mark on a majority of their students. Okay, so I'm going to switch over to Canvas for a moment. Before I do, I'm going to leave this up here. These are the recommended texts that I really like using in order as how often I reference them. Don't Make Me Think is a great book by Steve Krug, and it is very easy to get into, as is The Laws of UX by my previously mentioned John Jablonski. And The University Principles of Design is a much more serious and weighty text than the others. But anybody who's designing a course should think about reading these first two, as it may very well change the way you approach some of these elements. Okay, so let's look at some courses. So what I have here is a course that We at Arts Online recently redesigned called the Creative Process. Okay, so this is our home landing page. Let's take a look. We have a banner up top that helpfully tells us what you probably already know, which is that it's part of Rutgers Arts Online. We have a kind of a hero image with this description. It's meant to be very eye-catching. Students are going to come to this page probably every time they log into this course, so we want it to look good. And as we scroll down, we have these vertical tabs that have a welcome video, course structure, syllabus, meet your professor, meet your classmates, and then finally a table of contents. Okay, so what's wrong with this? How much time do we have, right? So first off, the page fold. I love this big image, but you notice how so much of the content is down below the page fold, and depending on where it comes in, if I refresh this, there we go, we have this element of what we call the false bottom, where there is no obvious indicator that there is content below the fold. So we call that the false bottom because we don't want students to go, oh, here I am in the course, let me click on modules, and then they miss all this data down here. So item number one, false bottom. Item number two, assignments, modules. I've got redundant buttons in this link grid. I mean, it's not bad, but redundancy is generally to be avoided. I can't get rid of this home button on the left here. There's nothing I can do to eliminate that. So sometimes it makes more sense to just accept that you're going to have this left-hand canvas menu and eliminate the link grid. Yes.
We have a, someone has, Priscilla has commented. She mentions that perhaps you keep that layout for the first 2 weeks until after add and drop.
That's actually not a bad idea. So in terms of keeping the layout, what I would love for these welcome video and the course structure video to magically disappear on their own after the first 2 weeks. Whether or not that's going to be, we can't magically do it, but that comes into how much you want to put on your teachers and your individual course designers. But that is actually something that I wish Canvas could do, is add or remove things based on a date lock. That's for another door, but that's absolutely a possibility. So let me continue going down here, trashing my own work, because I did do this, and so I have no problem treating it poorly. The table of contents. I don't like that these pictures aren't links. That's a bit of cognitive friction for me. I feel like pictures should be links like this. And here with the course selection, I feel like these should be links also. So what can we do? Well, let's look on to option B. So here we go. Here's number 2. I eliminated the top banner to get rid of the false bottom and to move more above the page roll. Now there's no doubt that there's a lot of content under here. The welcome video and the course structure video are still first. The table of contents now, I move that next because that is where people are probably going to go on a regular basis. I made the pictures buttons. They're the same links as the button, but in general, people think pictures next to links should be buttons also, so we do it. The syllabus is as it was, an embedded PDF. Now I've added in links here. This gives another way for people to get where they're going. But you notice I didn't put links to the assignments. This is intentional friction because I don't want people getting to these assignments before they've gone through the unit. So while I think it's completely appropriate to put links here, I'm not going to put links here. That's an example of positive friction. And then I dropped the meet your professor last because I really don't think anybody's going to look at that more than once, unless they need an email address or something, and there's not even one on this particular page. So, yes.
Great. Jen has mentioned, has asked a question. Can you please show us the module page and how it's different from the table you just showed us. And I will actually read the other comments later.
Yeah, sure. So the module page for this particular course is not gonna look good because I made it specifically for this. But if you hang on a moment, I can show you what the module page for this would look like in the actual. Actually, I can't. So in general, the module page looks identical, right? So when we have students who might want to prefer going to the module rather than through links, they're still able to do so by going into the modules. Again, I made this site specifically for the Canvas examples today, so I can't show you what this looks like. But for students who are used to that, they absolutely can still do that, and it will look identical to what they're used to. However, there's another one of those laws of UX that says, I'm paraphrasing here, give me a moment. Be liberal in what you accept, but be conservative in what you deliver. What we mean by that is we want to have, what we mean by that is we want to have multiple ways to get at everything, but we need to then deliver a consistent product, okay? So having multiple ways to get to the modules is correct and good, but when you get to the modules, you should have a familiar, consistent way of navigating. So you always get the same modules, but sometimes you get it from over here, or sometimes you access those things through the table of contents over here. Hopefully that made sense. But in terms of keeping the sidebar here, I mean, you can't get rid of it, so it does make sense. In general, I like this second homepage better. It's still not perfect, but to me, it works a lot better than the previous one does. Now, let's look at an example that's a lot trickier. And this is, sorry. Did we freeze? My picture's frozen. Am I good? Oh, okay. That's okay. I wouldn't care except for it was frozen in a particularly unflattering angle. It's hurting my ego, but that's okay.
I just want also, we do have some other comments in the chat before moving forward. Jen mentions that I agree that it's best to keep it the default Canvas links on the left. You can hide what you don't want students to see after all. Why move traditional links into the page where they are hidden?
So that's an excellent point. In general, I only advocate using links in this link bar if it's something that is a little different than what you're seeing up here. So for example, I will sometimes put a link grid that has a link back to the first page of that unit. So for instance, let's say that you're in unit 3 and you're on an assignment. I might put a link grid up there that includes in there a link back to unit 3 home, because that's not something that I could do on the sidebar. In general, because I don't like redundancy, I'm not going to use these link grids unless I have a specific reason to. Also, if you think about the F-shaped design that people are used to, everyone is used to links down the left, a menu down the left-hand side. So we have to have a really good reason to go against that. For me, most often it's if there's a link to a specific spot that I can't actually get from the sidebar. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you. And also, Priscilla mentions create 2 home pages and have the instructor switch it. Add a note in course prep list.
Yeah, that is a very good idea if you can trust your instructors to do so. Now, when we have Arts Online, we have some sections that we run off of the blueprint. So we have a lead instructor who manages the blueprint, and then we have, for instance, with Art Appreciation, like 12, 15, 16 sections. With those, it would be very difficult to manage each teacher to make sure all of those dozen teachers are doing what they're supposed to do. However, if we could do it from the blueprint, then it would be very effective. So I could see a situation where we have one homepage, and then a couple weeks in, it gets changed with things like welcome videos removed and other things put in there. So yeah, no, that's a great idea and one that we could look at doing. I would have to experiment with the blueprint to make sure that works smoothly, again, because of our bigger class sections, but some of this goes back onto how much responsibility you want to put on an individual teacher and how much you want to build into the course. If we could consistently use JavaScript, I would love to have a situation where, for instance, links were grayed out until a certain date or added in, but that's neither here nor there. Okay.
Yeah, let me just read the last comments that Jen had mentioned. So if you have multiple ways to get to the modules, does it take you a long time when you are updating the course to ensure that your links are up to date? Do you have difficulty updating to the various items like modules, calendars, and etc.?
In general, it doesn't take any more time because all of these links are basically just surface level links that go back to the same place. So in general, you just have to update everything once, and it should work. It should work fine. So for instance, you would still go into the modules here, and you would still. I'm in student view now, and I'm not logged in, which is why it looks like this. But you can still change all the dates here on modules, and everything should work just fine. If anyone out there doesn't use the blueprint system, by the way, for multiple class sections, it really is a time saver. Maybe that's a lecture for another day. Okay, let's look at another kind of fuzzier example. This is for an arts and health course that we're doing with REO in conjunction with NJPAC. So what we have here is an assignment. And I know it doesn't look like an assignment, and that's because I've configured things just for this. And we have the name of the assignment. Down here we have we're on step number 5 of 6. We have our basic instructions, and then a couple links to the previous ones in case you need to review. And down here we have the specific assignment outcomes and goals. Okay, so I have 4 different iterations of this, and this mimics what I might do when trying to decide on a layout. First, I'm gonna do the maximalist. Let's shove everything in there. It's gonna kind of look like an educational instructional designer spilled something onto the page, but here we go. So what I did first was I pulled in all of those earlier steps, and I said, okay, those links from before, I don't want you leaving my page because that adds to interaction cost, right? So everything's gonna be right here. You wanna watch the overview video, that's here. This is the unit 1, and you can go to the page if you need to. Unit 2, unit 3, unit 4. And then down here, I've added all of the previous steps in case you need to review. However, it opens it right up on number 5, which is our current step. Okay, so this is what I would call, this would be my starting point. This is like a maximalist design. There is way more information available now to the students than they might ever need. Some of them might need it. And so as I'm looking at this, I would say, okay, so what have I accomplished? I've moved everything onto one page, but I have a lot of extraneous things. And yeah, they're kind of hidden here, but boy, this makes me kind of uncomfortable when I see all these buried menus. So let's try another step. Okay, so we go over here. Now what I've done, just a couple little small changes. I've gotten rid of the bottom menu because we didn't need it. I can condense things up here. I've got my unit 5 only here, and down here, I put in all of those steps. Another thing that I didn't like about my maximalist version was you'll notice I have similar related information in different spots. You want to know about unit 1? Oh, it's right here. But wait, unit 1 is also right here. So that's bad design also. I had the similarly related material in 2 different sections. So option 2 basically says, okay, here's the introduction. Here's your assignment, what you do and what the outcomes are. And down the bottom, if you need to review the earlier steps, okay, then here you go. Here are our earlier steps. Then we could do what would be the minimalist approach. We say, okay, well, if people need to go back and review, they're going to get enough information from this drop-down tab. They would have been used to this because in unit 4, they would have seen just the first 4 of these, for instance, with 4 being the red one and 5 missing. So they get enough information here that they don't need all that other links. So this would be option 3. So we start here with links that leave the page and to interaction cost. I go to something that is really maybe too much information and badly organized, a middle ground that has review steps that can be viewed after if needed, and then finally a minimalist approach, which just has what I might want or what I think they would need. Now, in terms of procedure, what would happen next is I would get together with the actual subject matter expert or the course creator, and we would sit down and we would go through all of these, right? And these are the iterations that I talk about. And that person is, what we would call stakeholder. They're going to have a say in how this is organized and what they think. And then we need to think from the student's point of view, what will the student need to see? Are students really going to need to see this introduction video again? I mean, it's a nice video, but I'm kind of doubtful, right? So maybe we get rid of that. And this is where it becomes a collaborative process when we get to this step where we have multiple iterations that the designer can choose from. Okay.
Yeah.
Sure, go ahead.
Before going back to your slide, Olivia has a comment. I'm not sure if you are already explained this, but is there a way to view the heat map analytics you showed in one of the slides for Canvas pages?
So unfortunately, I can't do that, but we can make some assumptions. So for instance, what the data tells us is that this particular page, for example, if it's the F-shaped model, they're viewing the left-hand side here. They're going to view these steps here. They're all left-oriented. They'll read it across the top. And this is fairly well organized for that sort of reading. We have short sentence and bullet points. So if we're looking at the heat map data, we would hope that they would read this first sentence and then their brain would decide it's worth their time to hit the bullet points. And generally speaking, bullet points are an easier sell than a paragraph. So this is well formulated to the F-shaped viewing. This is a bit much. And anytime you have these drop downs of things that open, you're sometimes creating new false bottoms. So in terms of the page fold data, if you come here and you click on this earlier steps, there is a fear that people are going to do this, hit this overview, and not understand that this is its own thing, which is why I think this maximalist approach is actually the worst of all worlds, but it's really only a intermediate step. If we wanted to get good data on reading patterns for Canvas, we would probably have to get in a lab with some people and get some of the eye tracking software and watch how they read down things, because there are people who will tell you that if you have somebody who's paying for website content, like our students are, that they are going to be more meticulous readers and are going to view it in a more consistent way and read more. However, the other side of the spectrum says that why would they treat educational paid content any different if 95% of what they do follows pattern X? Then it's unreasonable to expect them to be able to ditch that pattern for the 5% of time that they spend on our Canvas sites. So I wish I had better data on this, and maybe we'll be able to get some. But that's the best we have. Are at the moment is this data that's geared towards casual web viewing and advertising. Okay, so does anyone else want to see anything about on these Canvas pages? If not, I'll pop back to the blueprint for a moment. I'm not blueprint. Sorry, I was reading the comments. The slides for a moment. And if anyone has any questions or comments, actually now's a good place to chime in if you want to holler out anything. So Priscilla mentioned Blueprint Association help. Yes, absolutely. If you don't use Blueprint and you have multiple course sections, it really is a time saver and it's not that hard to use. So I will second that. Contact them for Blueprint help. It will save you a lot of time and a lot of grief. Okay, so let me just wrap up by saying, I'm sorry. The reason we do this and the reason we want to think about these things is we want to make our student experience just a little bit better consistently so we can watch those changes and those improvements aggregate across an entire course and make the task of learning just a little bit smoother and a little bit easier. It won't take much effort and much research for the average designer and for the average educator to turn their class into something that is like a C level design wise up to a B, right? So almost any teacher with a little thought can look at their design and just change a few things to make it a little better and instantly raise the level of their class in terms of fluidity and lowering friction, and those things should lead to better outcomes. You've probably heard the term mental load, also working memory. All these different phrases, kind of come back to the same concept, which is that we only have so much brain power to do the task at hand, right? We only have so much up here that can help us do what we're trying to do. We don't want people using that brain power clicking links back and searching around for a syllabus or trying to figure out why a certain button doesn't work. We want them focusing that on the educational content. So it's worth our time to even make these small changes in order to make a better overall experience for the students.
Great. Someone also has a comment. Is there a standard that developers should follow for developing front-end web applications at Rutgers?
I don't know that I'm the right person to answer that. There are suggested standards and suggested fonts. In general, we tell our course creators to use all of the standard defaults that come in City Labs. Sorry, I should have mentioned this. If my Canvas courses look a little different than yours, it could be because we're using the City Labs plugin, which is a graphic, I guess called a graphic overlay of Canvas that is going to, add some bells and whistles, make it easier to design, and make things generally look better. So what we tell people is to use the defaults, the default font size, the default colors. If there is a standard that we should do and some templates we should use, I suspect that some of the, sorry, my bad. I suspect that is something that maybe the Office of Online Education could help with, but not that I know of offhand. Sorry. Okay, I hope that answered the question somewhat. Okay, any other questions, thoughts, concerns?
If there's any questions? Yeah. So do you have anything to add, Craig, for your presentation?
No, just thanks everyone for coming. And, what I hope you take from this is that, a little bit of design thinking and a little bit of user experience thinking into the production and maintenance of these courses is really going to go a long way to making them work better, look better, and function better. And people will be happier using them, and it's a win-win-win all around. So, take a little time, read some of the stuff, and and I think it's easy. It can be an easy enough win to incorporate some of these things in. So.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending this session. Please join us for the final remark by clicking the link that I have shared in the chat. We look forward to seeing you there, and thank you very much, Craig. It was a great presentation.
Oh, sorry. One thing. Somebody asked what year is the "Don't Make Me Think" book. Let's see. All right. Don't Make Me Think. Don't Make Me Think Revisited was last published in 2014, and he updated it so that it includes mobile design functionality. Now, 2014 is a lifetime ago in terms of web design, so maybe there'll be a new edition coming out soon. I still find the book very useful and very helpful. That's a 2014 book.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Bye for now.